Welcome everybody, I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July. Before we start with some announcements, I want to encourage you all to become Flathead Laker members and to donate to the Flathead Lake Biological Station. Both organizations do great work around the lake and we depend on our community for support. So there are envelopes around, you can talk to various employees of the station and board members of the Flathead Lakers to find out more information. But we really rely on your support for everything that we do. So I'm glad that you're here and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Hillary. So, thank you all for coming. If you've been to a previous Science on Tap, you know that it's a relaxed atmosphere, and as you can tell, we're right on time. Perfect. Couldn't have planned it better. Anyway, new venue, if you're pretty aware of that. We have a little technical difficulties. I apologize for the delay. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and the beer. Anyway, since we're running late, I'll try to keep my announcements to a minimum here. Thank you very much. So my name's Sean Devlin. I work at the biostation. That was Hillary, my wife, and she's with Flathead Lakers. Thank you all very much for coming, and I'll say right away thank you very much to the Finley Point Grill for their hospitality. If you're desperately missing Flathead Lake Brewing Company, I believe they have beer on tap. Buffalo Brown over there?
We actually have the Centennial IPA.
Centennial IPA, so a step up if you ask me. But I would like to encourage everybody or make everybody aware of a little Flathead Lake Biological Station news. We have a research cruise coming up on July 12th. I have some postcards over on the table and some up here as well. We still have slots available. You can check the website for details, and we encourage you to come on out and learn more about the station on the lake, which is kind of a unique opportunity. I think that's it. I think I'll cut everything else out, and you guys know it's a informal atmosphere, kind of go as we lead, and I'd like to take just 1 second to really thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. I'm blown away by the turnout once again, and I'm thrilled that a change in venue hasn't dropped numbers and that you all have come. Thank you very much. Round of applause for everybody here. All right, so without any further ado, with adjusting projectors or anything like that, I welcome Dr. Steve Running.
You know, this reminds me of in Europe, the big cathedrals, and the pulpit just towers above the people. And one time I was in one of those giant churches, and I thought, I got to see what it's like in the pulpit. And you're standing so far above your parishioners that I figured you could tell them anything and they'd believe it. And it's, that aura of power and authority just goes up as you get higher. So this is way higher than I normally am. So yeah, I really like to talk to groups like this. I've got a very formal talk I have to give in Bangkok in a couple of months, where everybody's wearing suits and ties. No matter how hot it is, you're still in a stupid suit and tie. And I guarantee I will think back to tonight and think, oh, why am I not back at Finley Point? So anyway, I have work to do. What am I doing screwing around? So I'm going to go through what's new in the global warming topic. Obviously a topic that's been around for decades and decades, and there's certainly a lot of movement finally, and so I want to try to, for about a half hour, tell you what I see as new, what I see as important, And I end with a set of what you might call new solutions that I just find real intriguing, that I like to tell people about it. And because just hearing about all the gloom and doom and stopping just is no good. There's a lot of new things happening, and so I'll end with that. So I can't help but start a topic like this with the Paris Summit. You can't overestimate how critical that was. Yeah, we tried in Copenhagen in 2009 and ended in shambles. And so we finally have an international agreement on basically the strategic direction that humanity needs to take. You can fuss about details all you want, but the fact is every single government agreed to this statement of the strategic direction that the world needs to take in the coming decades. And I just can't overestimate how critical that was, because that sends a signal across societies, across economies, across the banking and financial sector, that this is the trajectory that we're aiming for. I mean, you can't get anywhere if you don't know where you're going. And we now can say we know where we're going. I found this concept to maybe be the single most useful concept to get people thinking about, to understand why we're in this pickle we're in. And it's basically how small the atmosphere is. And so I use this is an image from the International Space Station. And the point that I use this picture for is to illustrate that when we think of the entire climate system, the atmosphere is the smallest part. We like to think of big sky country and think of the sky being big, but in depth, look at how thin the atmosphere is. Basically, the atmosphere is about as thick as from here to Polson. Think about it. From here to Polson is the sum total thickness of most of the atmosphere. Once you understand that concept, you realize it isn't all that hard to fill it up with pollutants, because it isn't very big compared to the planet. And that's what we're doing. Of course, the Keeling curve, Dave Keeling was a good friend of mine, lived in the Bitterroot, and of course, this is the fundamental knowledge we know that we're changing the atmosphere globally. The CO2 is going up everywhere on the planet, from the South Pole to Mauna Loa to Barrow. We measure it all over the place. His was the start, and so we know that CO2 is going up. And when you think of the previous slide, you can see why. The atmosphere isn't all that big in the climate system. And we're just plain filling it up with CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Now, with the IPCC reports, that I was part of the fourth, an author in the fourth assessment, and the fifth assessment just came out a year ago. They're about 2,000 pages long, and I've summarized them in one graph to save you a lot of reading. And this really is the one graph that's the bottom line of 2,000 pages. Basically, what we try to do to understand the climate system, it's kind of like a checkbook of inputs and outputs of money. Well, we're trying to understand energy inputs, energy outputs of the climate system. It's a mass and energy balance. And so we do this. Radiative forcing is the formal term. We do this for every component. Sorry,
I'm really sorry.
Beige Yukon in handicap zone needs to move or will be towed. No handicap sticker. Anybody who has a beige Yukon maybe needs to pay attention. It isn't me. I'm going to keep talking.
They could be upstairs.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like it's anybody here, so I hope they know to talk upstairs. All right, so this slide is 2,000 pages worth of summary, and basically what it does is it shows how scientists measure every single aspect of the climate system. Of course, they measure the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, all these things. We'll get back to those. But they measure aerosols. We measure changes in cloud cover. We changes in surface reflectance, in snow cover. We measure all sorts of things like that, and including changes in CO2. And then we add and subtract all these components, and we get to a bottom line of the change in what we call radiative forcing. And it comes to 2.3 watts per meter squared. Now, I'll bet you're all right on top of that fact. But I found a way to get us to think about that really works. Think of a Christmas tree light, little tiny, before LEDs, Christmas tree light bulb was about 2 watts. So imagine a Christmas tree light on 1 square meter, which is about a tabletop. And another Christmas tree light on the next square meter, and the next square meter, and the next square meter around the whole world. That's the additional energy we are now trapping from solar energy, 2.3 watts per meter squared. And so that's very straightforward. Svante Arrhenius figured this out in 1896. So this is very fundamental physics. And this is the measurement that is really the foundation of global warming, is all this extra energy being trapped. And we know this very accurately. We couldn't say this 20 years ago, but now we know where it's going also. And what we know is that since about 1980, most of that 2.3 watts per meter squared is going into the ocean. We hear a lot about glaciers melting and ice caps shrinking and things like that. That's real, but that isn't actually a big part of the climate system energy balance. It's all, 95% is the ocean. And so you see the ocean heating since 1980 is what has dramatically increased, and the land and the atmosphere are down here in the rounding error. That's why I say the atmosphere is a trivial part of the climate system. The atmosphere delivers the day-to-day weather to us, but it's a trivial part of the climate system as a whole. It has so little capacitance. And so, won't belabor this, that as we look at global temperatures, decade by decade, starting in around 1980, when people ask me, when did global warming start? I say right around 1980 is when we first see the trajectory going, and this is a good example of it, heading outside its normal range of variability. And of course, you probably have read in the news that in 2014, we set the all-time global temperature record. We then broke it in 2015, and we are so far ahead in 2016 that they already figure it'll break it yet again. And we're only halfway done, and they say we're so far ahead of temperature averages, they don't see how we won't set yet another all-time global temperature record this year. And so that is the manifestation that we see most regularly of that 2.3 watts per meter squared. Think of that. That's the engine of all of this. Now, another concept that I found that really helps us think about what this, not only what it means, but how it actually manifests itself for us normally, is to think of how temperatures, how normal temperatures occur anywhere on Earth. This is, imagine if we were to take, yeah, Polson has a reporting weather station. Yeah, I know it. Okay, so imagine we took the daily temperatures at Polson and just graphed them for a whole year. And there'd be the coldest night of the year, there'd be the hottest night of the year, and then everything in between, like a day like today. This is not an extreme day for this area in July. What global warming is doing is shifting that distribution over. And what's useful to look at this graphically is then it explains a couple things that are kind of useful. First, it explains that a lot of days, seem just like before. They don't seem like any big global warming's going on, and today's a good example. This is just not an extreme day, and yet when you look at this graphic, you realize, well, every day is not going to be an extreme day. But what this graph also shows is to go look at the edges. Go look at the temperature extremes on the top, or the lack of temperature extremes on the bottom. And we've done that for around Montana. And I put in just one slide, since this is summer, and I have only a half hour. I threw out the cold temperature, even though it never gets cold anymore. The old timers don't tell you this. It doesn't get cold here one bit like the old days. But look at the decade of the 1950s. The number of times the temperature went over 100 degrees. This is Missoula, incidentally. Something like 3 times an entire decade it went over 100 in the 1950s in Missoula. We went over 111 times in July '07 in 1 month. And what this shows is a tremendous amount of increased temperature in these high extremes. And so going back, what we're doing is we're zooming in on the edges of this distribution to see if they're changing. Because if you look in the broad middle, you don't see much. And you read in the newspapers all about the annual average temperature changing. To us climatologists, that's the most boring thing to look at of all. You go look at the edges of the distribution and you learn something. And sure enough, when we do this for sites all over Montana, the high temperatures, the days of 95 and 100 and 105 are getting more frequent. And of course, it never gets 30 and 40 below anymore. And everybody who's been here for a while has experienced that. Back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it still got 30, 40 below once in a while. Never anymore now. So that's a look at how the global warming physics manifests itself right here in our own local temperature. This, of course, is no news to any of this crowd either. We find now that the spring snowmelt is happening about 12 to 14 days earlier than it did 50 years ago. So we still have lots of winter snowpack, but what we see is that melt cycle starts a couple weeks earlier than it used to. You know, it used to be they took the snow course surveys on April 1st was the standard date from ever since long before I came along. They have to do it earlier now, because by April 1st, half the snow's melted out. And they want to get the peak of that, the snowpack for irrigation timing, and April 1st is too late. So think of this, 2 weeks earlier in snowmelt. What I see is happening in Montana here is just a slow change of what we call aridity, is the best way to think of it. This is an analysis we did about a 25-year trend for the whole western U.S. And let's just aim on Montana. Precipitation isn't changing much. We've looked at this pretty hard all around the state, and there's lots of variability. Our annual rain and snowfall, there's no trend up or down. But of course, the temperature, there is a clear trend up. And with higher temperatures, you get higher evaporation. With higher evaporation, you're aridifying that landscape. Just remember that Phoenix and Fairbanks have the same annual precipitation. The difference is in temperature and evaporation between Fairbanks and Phoenix. And so what we're seeing is the influence of that temperature slowly aridifying our climate. Our climate's kind of heading towards Salt Lake City climate is where it's going. When you think of our western Montana climate. Our biggest vulnerability by far, in absolute terms, is wildfire. Right? When we look globally, I know we talk about this, my global science friends, and, you know, what's the biggest human vulnerability worldwide? It's sea level rise, for sure. And so when we consider this global question, Miami better start paying attention, for example. But for us, of course, we escape that one, but we don't escape everything. And accelerating wildfire, these are some numbers from a paper in Science a few years back, and we just year after year after year see the fire season starting earlier, fires getting larger, burning for a longer period of time, and there's no reason at all to expect that to change. Well, not to change, to do anything but slowly get longer and longer. Of course, California now figures they have a year-round fire season. Wasn't that an amazing fire in Fort McMurray in April? And it's burning up in the boreal forest in April? And so that's just what we have. That's our Achilles heel. It isn't sea level rise. This is the one that we have to pay most attention to ultimately in our part of the world. The other part of what we have to think about, and we have actually more that we can do something about, is water management. All of our water, we live in a semi-arid state. We're water limited basically in a very fundamental way in our ecosystems. Just about every drop of water you have three different, at least three different competing interests. Recreation and ecosystem integrity, agriculture, and then power consumption. People forget that things like coal plants use huge amounts of water, not to mention coal, but they're a massive water source. A lot of the fracking uses a huge amount of water also. And so the energy industry is a water competitor along with agriculture and ecosystems and recreation. What I've calculated is that our precipitation would need to be increasing by about 1 inch per year every decade to keep up with how it's warming up. And it just isn't. It's staying flat. Precipitation isn't changing. If it would go up 1 inch a year, or an inch per year per decade, which sounds weird, but think your way through it. It makes sense. I promise it makes sense. If we would get that much extra water, our climate would be heading more towards Portland instead of Salt Lake City. So you think of the climate trajectory that we're on, and that's kind of the two vectors that is useful framing for where we're going. Portland if it would rain more, Salt Lake City if it doesn't rain more. All right, so that's enough of the climate science. Now, what are some things going on that I find interesting and sometimes good and bad? With this water management, I think we're going to have to return yet again to a lot of thinking about how we can enhance storage in our watersheds. Snowpack is perfect. Whoever invented snow was brilliant. Have you ever thought of snow as black, how fast it'd melt? It's the right color. It's nice and cold. It sits up there for months. It's perfect. And we're losing it. And so we're going to have to find other ways to retain water in our watersheds. And this is something, beaver ponds. I love this. The first time I was at a hydrology meeting, and I thought a joke, said, oh, we ought to bring beavers back. We're way ahead of me on that. They're all over reintroducing beavers as these small little pico reservoirs around in high mountain watersheds. We know that water management can bring dewatered streams back to river flow. This is Parkour Coalition is one of their illustrations. And so we're going to have to be thinking about very carefully prioritizing how we use water. We will someday reach the point that California and Arizona are already at. You know Lake Mead's at its all-time low right now, and they're hitting the wall. They're going to have to decide very seriously what priorities are for water, because they have higher demand than they have supply, simple as that. And then I got to move on to energy. First, some global data, and this is from the global carbon budget that they take global statistics from around the world, and this is the sources. For those of you way in back, these are the sources of CO2 emission from these different fossil fuel sources. So I'll help you guys in back. Bottom is cement, which, believe it or not, has a pretty measurable carbon emission. Then natural gas, and oil, and do I need to say what the top is? And this is why I've been saying for years, until humanity quits burning coal, nothing else matters. If we don't quit burning coal, there's no use doing anything else. And that's why right there, that one slide, is it so dominates the carbon emissions of the world right now that it's the obvious first place to start. In the last few years, there's been more analysis done of basically if the Paris Agreement to stay substantially below a 2-degree temperature increase and actually aim for a 1.5 degree centigrade increase, what that would mean and how many carbon emissions humanity could generate over the coming half century, it finally dawned on lots of people that 50% of known oil reserves and 80% of known coal reserves can't ever be burned. Yay. You can't have it both ways. If you burn it, you're going to blow past 2 degrees. So this is very simple arithmetic, actually. And it's amazing. We as global scientists knew this for a long time, but we didn't know how to state it succinctly enough for it to register. And a couple of groups finally did with a slide like this. And that's really when the Paris Accords got some momentum. Is we can't even burn what we already found. So why would an oil company be spending tens of billions of dollars on new exploration if they can't burn what they already have? And that's what the financial sector is now starting to ask questions about. I think we have turned a corner on coal in these last 2 years. And I've watched and battled this intensely for over a decade with great pessimism until the last about 2 years and 1 year. And I have to say that I feel badly for the coal miners themselves. I mean, these are people that are losing their jobs. But it's sure easier to retrain and redeploy them than it is to fix the climate otherwise with what we get in coal-generated emissions. And so this is a choice humanity has to make, either blow past 1.5 degrees warming or it goes down coal. And there really isn't a middle ground. And what we're seeing is finally that choice starting to be made in a very forceful way. Coal's fraction of electric power production in the U.S. was 50% only about a decade ago. It's now 30% and just nosediving. It's now diving faster than we ever thought was possible. I read every month and I can't believe it. And so we have really turned a corner on coal burning. Finally, in the U.S., the sad news is globally I can't say that the same thing yet. Although China is very serious about driving down its coal imports. In fact, they've formally stated that they will quit importing coal by the end of 2017. And so there's not going to be any market in China for Montana coal and all these coal trains. And I think some people that need to know this are finally hearing it. And the Chinese announced this publicly. This isn't some secret. They have a 5-year national plan. Can you imagine a country that actually plans ahead? Quaint concept. And so they've announced this as a 5-year goal. And my friends that that are Chinese and no Chinese say these aren't just political fluff. They mean it when they put these into the formal 5-year goals. Let's move on to the next step. We like to hope that natural gas is an important bridge fuel as we get to full renewables, but I'm afraid there's all sorts of dirty linen boiling up in the methane emissions out of the gas fields. Did you know that the Bakken was flaring $100 million a month of gas simply because they were too lazy to collect it and nobody was forcing to? They didn't have to pay royalties on it because they didn't market it. And so they're just squirting it into the sky. Luckily, instead of it being methane, they burned it to CO2, thinking, oh, isn't that a good deal? This is our taxpayer money. This pisses me off as a citizen, even as much as a scientist, that we allow that industry that kind of sloppiness. And I think we're finally getting traction on this one. There's all sorts of scrutiny going on right now and how much flaring is going on in the gas fields. And because there's the actual net emissions against coal are almost a toss-up if they have this much flaring out. You're not gaining anything. And so this is something now we have to pay attention to. One of not my single biggest point of optimism. My second biggest point of optimism is the big financial players are now paying attention. And they're now really thinking through where the world's going in the future, where the global energy supply, where the global investments need to be. Finally, in Copenhagen in 2009, none of them were paying any attention at all. So this is really a change in these last 5 years. And you see, these sort of people putting their own money. They are starting a whole program to incentivize renewable energy. And the bigger thing is the financial world is starting to look real hard at coal, gas, and oil for the long term, 10 and 20 and 30 years, and realizing that we can't stay at 1.5 degrees, as that slide showed before, and burn all these reserves that they're sitting on. And so that's the choice humanity has to make. The solar industry is finally really getting traction, and every year the panel's performance goes up and the price goes down. It's just like the good old days of personal computers, where they get stronger and cheaper at the same time. How often does that happen in any of our economy? And this is what solar panels are doing now. I know I have 14 panels in Missoula, and from April to October, I don't pay a dime of electric power cost at all. And so and my panels are old. I'm wishing, gee, I wish I had the new ones that are 30% higher performance. And so solar is really coming into play, and it's going to be distributed everywhere, rather than a few huge power plants like huge hydro dams or huge coal plants. We're going to have 1 million sources of a little bit of electricity all over the place. And solar power is part of that, not all of it, but part of it. And it's finally really starting to get to a price point where it's a logical thing to do. Same with wind power. The wind turbine technology has been, I think I can say, perfected. There's been enough generations of engineering of wind turbines that they've learned how to slow them down so they aren't so noisy, so they don't kill so many birds, and so they have gearing in them so that the wind can just be howling. I go to Portland down the Columbia Gorge, and those famous gorge winds. The wind's howling away, and the blades are going about like this, because they're now geared to just put more resistance in. They're still generating more electric power, but they're not turning faster. with hydropower, and I have to admit, my dad was an Army Corps of Engineer, and so he built a bunch of the dams that people badmouth. The deal with hydropower is we build enough of the structures, but almost every one of them has very less than optimum turbine technology. So they could swap out their old turbines. Most of these dams are 40, 50, 60 years old. They could swap those out with newer turbines and double their capacity. You don't need to build more dams, you just need to bring the current dams up to current capabilities. All right, now's when I really go off the deep end. I probably need more beer. I predict that within about 10 years, nobody will own a piston engine car anymore. Piston engines are really ancient. The piston engine technology was invented in the 1880s. Now, when is it time for us to wise up? And so they really aren't a very efficient way of taking a unit of gasoline or any kind of liquid fuel, ethanol if you like ethanol, turning that to power through a piston engine is really an obsolete technology. And I don't intend to ever buy another piston engine. Everybody's all pumped for the Tesla. I know my brother-in-law put in his deposit for, they had 400,000 deposits laid down. Detroit's never seen anything like this with a new car. And yet, I read that Chevy, when they get their Bolt on the market, which is only a number of months away, I've read a number of engineering analysis that say it's actually going to be better than a Tesla in the same price. So I like to think Detroit is fighting back with technology, not BS. And so we're going to, I really see that this transition from piston engine, liquid fuel to electric vehicles is going to happen fast, and we're right on the front end of it. It's going to be interesting to watch, and I think the momentum is really building on that. Another thing that I find interesting, the teenagers of today aren't all that hep on driving. Look at that statistic. Over 25% of 19 to 24-year-olds haven't even bothered to get a driver's license. That's how interested they are in owning a car. They figure they'll just call up Uber when they want to go somewhere. Now that certainly isn't in Polson, Montana. There's no doubt about that. I mean, these are big city things. But that's a real measure of change of social consciousness that is quite significant. That they are not as obsessed with getting a driver's license and getting their first car as my generation was. I always found it kind of dumb. We got our driver's license to get a car, and then we got a job to pay for the car, and the only reason we needed the car was to get to the job. If we didn't have the car, we wouldn't need the job, and we could go to the lake. Another thing that's becoming clear to me is taking, for instance, bioenergy. I'm spending a fair bit of time looking at that. Trying to make ethanol out of biomass and then burning it in a piston engine is a stupid thing to do. What you want to do is start with your biomass, generate electric power, and then drive an electric drive chain. It's at least double the efficiency straight away. And you realize how inefficient. Oh, I have an experiment for tonight. This is a perfect experiment going home. Turn the heater on in your car full blast the whole way home. And that'll give you just a sense of how much wasted heat pours out of your piston engine all the time. The heat pouring out of that engine is immense. And if you don't believe me, run your heater the whole way home. And think that that's only a fraction of the heat pouring out of that engine. And that's all total waste. Total waste. And I think electric vehicles are really I saw just last week the world record electric vehicle 0 to 60 acceleration, 1.33 seconds. That crushes a Porsche, that crushes any piston engine you can find. And it's a bunch of college kids in Hamburg, Germany. It's on YouTube. Go Google it and watch. 1.3 seconds, 0 to 60. So to me, piston engines are a goner. Building ethanol, making ethanol out of bioenergy to put in a piston engine is a goner. That's just the wrong way. Go to electric vehicles straight away. Of course, even better is go to these kind of vehicles. And so it's interesting to see, I've lived in a number of other countries, how they're willing to invest money in infrastructure for non-car transport. I mean, these are some of the things around Vienna that I would ride around. Look at these whole big thoroughfares, their own pedestrian bridges. If we want people to get out of cars, we've got to give them some place to go, and we're slowly getting there right now. This is kind of one of my favorites. How many have been on an electric assist bicycle? They are getting way cool now, because the electric motor is just down here in the hub. The electric battery sits there. You can ride it all you want normally, and if it just gets too hard, you press this magic button. And I ain't getting any younger, and the day will come when I get one of these, but this really could make a bicycle commute much more palatable for lots of people if they had bike paths and bike lanes and weren't out driving in traffic. Every survey they do of potential bike commuters, the first thing they say is get us away from cars and we'll ride our bike. And I've ridden my bike in Missoula for 35 years and I'm still upright, but I have a pretty easy backcountry road. And so that's, these really, if can make a bike ride very much fun. And the price, as usual, I think they're below $2,000 now. And 2 years ago they were double that. So they're coming down in price and getting very efficient. And then there's driverless cars. I'm watching that one. Probably all of you are reading about the driverless cars. And I first thought it was just, okay, we'll all buy a driverless car, and as we commute to work, we'll read the paper. And I thought, well, nobody reads papers anymore, so I guess they'll be looking at their phone. Well, it turns out that the real model that the big thinkers are thinking about is you won't own the car anymore at all. It'll be more Uber style, where you will just schedule for one of these robot cars to come get you, take you to work, but then it won't sit there all day. Have you ever looked at a city, how much of the city is parking lots? That is complete wasted space. So the idea with this is you don't have your own car that sits in a parking lot. That car takes you to work and then goes and takes other people to work, and all day long it's working. They calculate that at least half the cars on the road could be gone if this was fully adopted. And of course, here we are in Montana, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but you get into gridlock in the big cities, and the idea of taking half the cars off the road is very attractive.
Even now.
But even better, autonomous trucks are going to be there first. Have you read about these? They actually did a run in Europe about a month ago, and so these are driverless trucks. And there's a lead truck. Maybe the lead truck has a driver, although I'm not even sure of that. And then there's a string of trucks behind them with no drivers, and they're just all like a truck train. they can tailgate because they know exactly what each one's gonna do, so they can drive way close to each other. Imagine if trucks could be set out on the freeways only from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. They drive all night long, and then they'd get off the road. Yay! Yeah. No kidding. And so I think this will arrive before driverless cars. Is going to be driverless trucks on main interstate routes. They're not going to be. These are going to be the real pipeline truck routes like Seattle to Minneapolis. I don't think this is more than a couple of years away because they're already testing them in Europe. And of course, home efficiency, there's all sorts of new things going on, and I won't belabor these at this time. I think that we're all aware of a lot of the designs. They have a competition of college students for architecture, and this is some pictures of them. There's so much activity in retrofitting nowadays. You know, new refrigerators. Of course, the light bulbs, the LEDs are now just killing the light bulb market. They have absolutely taken over, and they're now $2 a piece. And I can't believe they've gotten so cheap. But they're so cheap, why you would have anything else, I can't imagine. And so they have really arrived, and they cut energy consumption by 90%. And remember that 90% was heat, which your air conditioner then had to air condition and take back out. So you get a double payback in the summer of a cooler light bulb and less heat that an AC unit has to draw out of the building. And so that's a real double win. We do have a lot to work on in recycling. And I think about this every time I go to the recycling center. And I don't do as well as I should either. But I know that they don't have figured out the entire product stream to make it worthwhile. And so there's just a whole lot of work that needs to be done in recycling. So basically, to end, this is a projection that the climate models make from basically now to the end of the century. And the difference between this one, which when I've had a couple of beers, I call the Cheney curve, but I haven't had enough beers yet, so I ain't calling it that. This is a business as usual curve. And on the other extreme is way down here, where we've stabilized the climate by the end of the century. And this isn't model noise in here. This isn't confusion by the climate models of the physics. This is not knowing what humanity is going to choose to do. This is now a sociology experiment. It's not a physics experiment anymore. The physics we've all done, and we're trying to retire and hand this to the social scientists, because this is what humanity has to decide. Do we want to end up up here at 4 or 5 degree centigrade global warming by the end of the century, which is very much possible. The business as usual trajectory takes us to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit warming by the end of the century. Or we can choose to drill down to a stable climate. And the important thing I want you to go away with is that Paris Agreement was the first step of turning that direction. Finally, it was the first formal step, and it's now in the books. So in my mind, we have turned the corner, and we have to really just keep on keeping on. We do have a climate change studies minor at the University of Montana. I'm paid by the president to give this plug. No. Actually, I am paid by the president, but he has no idea I give this plug. But this is for our students that want to get into this more often. And I have always liked to end with this cartoon. You've probably seen it a million times, but it's so good. Energy independence, preserving rainforests, green jobs, livable cities.
That's great.
What if it's all a big hoax and we're building a better world for nothing? So that's it. I think that. And so now with great reluctance, I answer questions, right?
I think that I don't know if you that was an amazing talk. I'd just like to say that. Let's hear it. So now we transition to questions and answers. I would hope that everybody has a full glass. If you need one, please.
I don't.
Yeah. So let's somebody please buy the man a beer. Seriously. Right. So
About that Belgian IPA.
there you go. So this is a good segue into something I didn't announce for lack of time earlier. Is that every pint you buy, the Finley Point Grill has been gracious enough to donate $1 of that purchase to the Lakers and to the station to split. So we're drinking for cause. This is a fundraiser. Yeah. Let's drink responsibly, of course, I should say, I suppose. But, you know. So yeah, now we usually have questions and answers, and we'd like things to just be kind of informal. Steve will call on you. Please wait for your question, and Steve, I'd ask you to repeat the question if you hear it, so that everybody can hear what's going on.
That's when I really get in trouble.
You can make up your own questions. That, you're asking this. Feel free.
The question that I want.
Yeah, it's actually a nice trick. So I welcome any questions, and I know I have a few. I'll start off with one. I don't do this much, but I have one. So I have a diverse group of friends, and let's say we have a climate change skeptic who enters a conversation. Maybe both from it's not happening at all to it's not human caused gradient. What's your best go-to? It is happening. Here's the proof. One sentence, shut them down, sort of statement. And please, I'll allow Steve to call on folks, and here we go.
Well, we know how well that one sentence and shutting down works. But actually, the best source for factual rebuttals to the normal denier claims is a website called Skeptical Science, and it comes out of Australia. It's written by a bunch of climate scientists, and they just, whenever a new denier claim, like the sun's getting brighter, was one a few years back, and they say, well, it turns out we measure solar input to 6 significant digits at the top of the atmosphere, and guess what? It's not getting brighter. And so they just take every denier statement and say, here's the facts. So that I would recommend if you have people that actually want to know the facts, which is kind of the problem. But if they actually want to know the facts, then that's the best single source for covering science rebuttals to a lot of the denier claims. The other source that I found really valuable for a number of years, it's a social science survey done out of Yale and George Mason, and they do a number of reports under the label Global Warming 6 Americas. And what they found is that our society segments into about 6 cohorts. And on the one extreme, I guess I'm one extreme, the raging climate deniers are the polar opposite extreme of mine. They find that something like 60 to 70% of the public acknowledges the science is real, and they have varying motivations of what to do about it. That final 30% mostly are not raging deniers, they're just indifferent. Yeah, and in fact, the best way I've thought of it myself, and I'm sorry to say I have a few in my own extended family that fit this. They just live in a life bubble where they don't care about much of anything outside of their immediate cohort. You ask them any detailed question, you ask them about the Brexit vote 2 weeks ago, which is a big deal if somebody doesn't know. They don't even know what Brexit is, what the vote was. They have no clue about any of it. And so it isn't that they're anti-climate science, it's just they don't engage in bigger topics beyond their own little world. And so to me, one of the biggest challenges is how do you wake them up to realize you're going to live through this whether you like it or not. You better start getting on the wavelength, because they're not, the amount of vociferous deniers is actually amazingly small and getting smaller.
What comments do you have for those of us that eat with wood? Because there's tons of people in Montana that do.
That heat with wood,
Yeah.
I don't, yeah, that would actually, yeah, that's right. And then when I fall off it, then that's the end of the show. You figure that's wood that would decompose in the forest anyway. And all wood burning, well, my cabin here, this is how I heat it in the winter. And so I don't see any problem with burning wood for heat.